So good morning, everybody. We're reading the 14 lessons in Yogi philosophy and Oriental occultism. Today we are reading lesson 3, the spiritual principles. In our second lesson, we gave you a brief outline of the fourth and fifth principles of man, that is, instinctive mind and intellect. As we have told you before, man has passed through the fourth principle stage to its extreme and has now passed on to a consciousness of the fifth principle, intellect. Some of us have developed the intellectual stage to a considerable extent, although we have practically conquered but a few square miles of the new territory of the mind, and there is still a great task before us. While other men seem to have a consciousness almost together within the borders of the instinctive mind and only have a glimmering of intellect. Not only is this true of the savage races, but very many of the so-called civilized people have not learned to do their own thinking and seem willing to allow others to do their thinking for them. They follow certain leaders with stupid habit of the sheep. But still the race is progressing, slowly but surely, and many are thinking now who never thought before. A greater number are refusing to take their thinking secondhand and are insisting upon knowing for themselves. When we consider that there are many men in whom the fifth principle, the intellect, has scarcely unfolded, and that the race in general has taken but a few steps into the land of the intellect, we begin to realize how difficult it is for any of us, except the man or woman of exceptional spiritual unfoldment, to comprehend even faintly the still higher principles. It is something like a man born blind, trying to comprehend light, or one born deaf, endeavoring to form a mental concept of sound. One can only form an idea of something akin to his experiences. A man who has never tasted anything sweet cannot form an idea of sugar. Without experience or consciousness of a thing, our minds are unable to form a concept. But nearly all of us who have been attracted to these lessons or who have attracted these lessons to us have had experiences which will enable us to comprehend something of the sixth principle, have had glimmerings of consciousness which help us understand something of the spiritual mind, a tendency toward the occult, the hunger of the soul for more light, are indications that the sixth principle, spiritual mind, is beginning to shade into our consciousness. And although it may be ages before we awaken into full spiritual consciousness, we are still being influenced and helped by it. The spiritual unrest often causes us great discomfort until we find ourselves on the right road to knowledge, and even thereafter, we feel more or less unsatisfied by the few crumbs that drop to us from the table of knowledge. But despair not, seekers after truth. These pains are but to the travail of spiritual birth. Great things are before you. Take courage and fear not. Toward the end of this lesson, we will speak of the process of illumination or spiritual consciousness, which will come or is coming to many of us. And what we have to say, there's a huge truck going by. I hope it's not causing too much background. I think it's a garbage truck. And what we have to say may throw light upon many experiences which have come to you and for which you have to heretofore had no explanation. Let me reread that paragraph. Toward the end of this lesson, we will speak of the process of illumination or spiritual consciousness, which has come or is coming to many of us. And what we have to say may throw light upon many experiences which have come to you and for which you have heretofore had no explanation. We will now take up the subject of the sixth principle, spiritual mind, which will be more or less plain to those who have glimmerings of consciousness from this plane of the soul, but which will be full of hard sayings and dark corners to those who have not yet reached this stage of unfoldment. The seventh principle, the spirit, however, is beyond the comprehension of any except the few enlightened and highly developed souls. in and out of the body, who are as far above the ordinary man as the average enlightened man is above the bushman. We can but pass on to you enough to give you a general intellectual idea of what is meant by spirit. The consciousness of it is still far beyond the race in its present stage. It is well, however, to know of the existence of spirit, as it helps us to understand something of the spiritual mind, which is spirit's means of communication with the intellectual consciousness. The comprehension of spiritual mind, however, opens up such a wonderful world of thought that we are satisfied to leave in the understanding of spirit until such a time as we will grow into a consciousness of it. I just want to hit pause. The spiritual mind, the sixth principle, spiritual mind, has been styled by some writers the superconscious mind, which term is a fairly good one, as it distinguishes between the lower subconscious mind or instinctive mind, the conscious mind or intellect, and itself, which latter, while outside the realm of ordinary human consciousness, is still a very different thing from the lower or instinctive mind. While the actual existence of the spiritual mind has been made to manifest to but a limited number of the human race, there are many who are becoming conscious of a higher something within, which leads them to higher and nobler thoughts, desires, aspirations, and deeds. And there is still a greater number who receive a faint glimmering of the light of the spirit, and though they know it not, are more or less influenced by it. In fact, the entire race receives some of its beneficent rays, although in some cases the light is so bedimmed by the dense material objects surrounding the man that his spiritual twilight is almost akin to the blackness of night. But man is ever unfolding, discarding sheath after sheath, and is slowly coming home. The light will eventually shine full upon all. All that we consider good, noble, and great in the human mind emanates from the spiritual mind and is gradually unfolded into the ordinary consciousness. Some Eastern writers prefer the term projected, as more correctly indicating the process whereby the ray of light is sent into the consciousness of the man who has not yet reached the superhuman stage of full spiritual consciousness. All that has come to man in his evolution, which tends toward nobility, true religious feeling, kindness, humanity, justice, unselfish love, mercy, sympathy, etc., has come to him through his unfolding spiritual mind. His love of God, his love of man, has come to him in this way. As the unfoldment goes on, his idea of justice enlarges. He has more compassion. His feeling of human brotherhood increases. His idea of love grows, and he increases in all the qualities which men of all creeds pronounce good, and which may be summed up as the practical attempt to live out the teachings of that great spiritual master. When he enunciated the great truth, well understood by the occultists of all creeds, but so little understood by many who claim to be followers of him, saying, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." As man's spiritual consciousness begins to unfold, he begins to have an abiding sense of the reality of the existence of the supreme power. And growing along with it, he finds the sense of human brotherhood, of human relationship, gradually coming into consciousness. He does not get these things from his instinctive mind, nor does intellect make him feel them. Spiritual mind does not run contrary to intellect. It simply goes beyond intellect. It passes down to the intellect certain truths which it finds in its own regions of the mind, and intellect reasons about them. But they do not originate with intellect. Intellect is cold. Spiritual consciousness is warm and alive with high feeling. Man's growth toward a better and fuller idea of the divine power does not come from intellect, although the latter reasons upon the impressions received and tries to form them into systems, creeds, cults, etc. Nor does the intellect give us our growing sense of the relationship between man and man, the brotherhood of man. Let us tell you why a man is kinder to his kind and to forms of life below him than ever before. It is not alone because the intellect teaches him the value of kindness and love, for man does not become kind or loving by cold reasoning. On the contrary, he becomes kind and loving because there arise within him certain impulses and desires coming from some unknown place, which render it impossible for him to be otherwise without suffering discomfort and pain. These impulses are as real as other desires and impulses, and as man develops, these impulses become more numerous and much stronger. Look at the world of a few hundred years ago, and look at it today, and see how much kinder and more loving we are than in those days. But do not boast of it, for we will seem as mere savages to those who follow us and who will wonder at our inhumanity to our brother man from their point of view. As man unfolds spiritually, he feels his relationship to all mankind, and he begins to love his fellow man more and more. It hurts him to see others suffering, and when it hurts him enough, he tries to do something to remedy it. As time goes on and man develops, the terrible suffering which many human beings undergo today will be impossible, for the reason that the unfolding spiritual consciousness of the race will make the pain felt so severely by all that the race will not be able to stand it, and they will insist upon matters being remedied. From the inner recess of the soul comes a protest against the following of the lower animal nature. And although we put it aside for a time, it will become more and more persistent until we are forced to heed it. The old story of each person having two advisors, one at each ear, one whispering to him to follow the higher teachings and the other tempting him to pursue the lower path, is shown to be practically true by the occult teachings regarding the three mental principles. The intellect represents the capital I consciousness of the average person. This I has on one side the instinctive mind, sending him to the old desires of the former self, the impulses of the less developed life of the animal or lower man, which desires were all very well in the lower stages of development, but which are unworthy of the growing man. On the other side is the spiritual mind, sending its unfolding impulses into the intellect and endeavoring to draw the consciousness up to itself, to aid in the man's unfoldment and development, and to cause him to master and control his lower nature. The struggle between the higher and lower natures has been noticed by all careful observers of the human mind and character, and many have been the theories advanced to account for it. In former times, it was taught that man was being tempted by the devil on one hand and helped by a guardian angel on the other. But the truth is known to all occultists that the struggle is between the two elements of man's nature, not exactly warring, but each following its own line of effort, and the I being torn and bruised in its effort to adjust itself. The ego is in a transition stage of consciousness, and the struggle is quite painful at times. But the growing man in time rises above the attraction of the lower nature, and dawning spiritual consciousness enables him to understand the true state of affairs and aids him in asserting his mastery over the lower self and in assuming a positive attitude toward it, while at the same time he opens up himself up to the light from the spiritual mind and holds himself in a negative attitude toward it, resisting not its power. The spiritual mind is also the source of the inspiration which certain poets, painters, sculptors, writers, preachers, orators, and others have received in all times, and which they receive today. This is the source from which the seer obtains his vision, the prophet his foresight. Many have concentrated themselves upon high ideals in their work and have received rare knowledge from this source and have attributed it to beings of another world, from angels, spirits, from God himself, but all came from within. It was the voice of their higher self speaking to them. We do not mean to say that no communications come to man from other intelligence. Far from this. We know that higher intelligence do often communicate with man through the channel of his spiritual mind. But much that man has attributed to outside intelligence has really come from himself. And man, by the development of his spiritual consciousness, may bring himself to a higher relationship and contact with this higher part of his nature, and may thus become possessed of a knowledge of which intellect has not dared dream. Certain high psychic powers are also open to man in this way, but such powers are rarely obtained by one until he has risen above the attractions of the lower part of his nature. For unless this were so, man might be, let me reread this, I lost. Certain high psychic powers are also open to man in this way, but such powers are rarely obtained by one until he has risen above the attractions of the lower part of his nature. For unless this were so, man might use these high gifts for base purposes. It is only when man ceases to care for power for his personal use that power comes, such as law. When man learns of the existence of his spiritual mind and begins to recognize its promptings and leadings, he strengthens his bond of communication with it and consequently receives light of a greater brilliancy. When we learn to trust the spirit, it responds by sending us more frequent flashes of illumination and enlightenment. As one unfolds in spiritual consciousness, he relies more upon this inner voice and is able more readily to distinguish it from impulses from the lower planes of the mind. He learns to follow spirit's leadings and to allow it to lend him to a guiding hand. Many of us have learned to know the reality of being led by the spirit. To those who have experienced this leading, we need not say more, for they will recognize just what we mean. Those who have not yet experienced it must wait until the time comes for them. We cannot describe it, as there are no words to speak for these things which are beyond words. I think I paused here. Oh, literally the last paragraph again. Toward the close of this lesson, we will give a brief outline of some of the phase of illumination or awakening of spiritual consciousness, which has come to some of us and will come to all in this or future phases of their unfoldment. We must hasten on to a brief consideration of that which can only be faintly understood by any of us, the seventh principle, spirit. And tomorrow we'll start on spirit. Or Monday. Oh, shoot. So if anyone has anything to share or ask.
No, but thank you for reading.
I felt very distracted in my mind. I was like, I probably should have meditated yesterday.
Oh my God, I'm so distracted. This kitten is so bad.
Aw,
She's so bad, but she's so sweet.
she's so cute. Is she yours?
She's my boyfriend's family's.
Oh my God.
So cute.
She's so cute, but her teeth hurt so bad, and she just wants to play, and she has no
Gotta
fighting.
get some toys.
Yes, she has a scratching pad and a guinea pig that she plays with.
Oh my God.
Guinea pig.
Dan, I've been reading this on my own at night because it's a lot to take in the morning.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a good sequel to the Bhagavad Gita because it's kind of saying the same thing, but in different ways.
I feel like that's what all these texts do. It's like when I was reading the religious quote about like God thy shalt, like these words are like scary to me because they're religious words, or like to me they're like religious theme. But I'm like, all Ram Dass has to say is imagine all your friends as God and drag, and I'm like, okay, great. But then you start throwing the thou shalts and everything else, and I'm like, what? It's the same thing, just presented differently.
Yeah.
It's funny, I had started reading this before. I'm not sure how far I got into it. Lost the bookmark, but I've got some things marked from when I was reading it before. And I've got passages marked in what you read this morning, and it's so interesting because I don't know why I marked them. Like I'm like, oh, why did I highlight that last time? Because I wouldn't have if I was reading it today. It's so interesting. That whole passage about what we consider good and noble and great in the human mind. I had the whole passage marked. As you were reading it again this morning, I was like, why did I do that?
Shows how different your mind was. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right? Yeah, I was doing the same thing with a book that I just read.
So
why did I highlight this?
Yeah.
I talked about that when we first started because my book's all marked. I'd be like curious to see what resonates with me this time around. But we do this too, like when I go through the sutras each time. Like I have all these tabs here, but like each time something else resonates with me. So it's like interesting when you reread through things.
Yeah.
Like a different person was reading it before.
Exactly. And that's like exactly how I feel. And sometimes I take notes along with it. I don't mark up books too often, but I'll take like a running note, like back to my high school days. I highlighted one part of this spiritual mind part, and it's the sentence that says, but still the race is progressing. Slowly but surely, and many are thinking now who never thought before. A greater number are refusing to take their thinking secondhand and are insisting upon knowing for themselves. I read this in 19, and just like when the world felt like it, myself included, was starting to like wake up and stop just like acting like our robot self, like, you know, like starting to take things into their own hands. But I kept thinking about, you know, my guru, Brene Brown, because I'm reading her book. And she often does this in this book where she lovingly refers to it on her blog, and she writes her 2007 breakdown, and then she crosses out breakdown and puts spiritual awakening. And I feel like that's what, to me, it feels like. It feels like you're breaking down your old self, even though it's still the true you, but like all the past learnings and ways you've interacted with people, it feels like this emotional breakdown, but really it could just be a spiritual awakening.
That's cool.
And I don't think it necessarily is a one-time thing. Like, I think it could happen and happen and happen.
Yes, it's like in the book, like this one line I highlighted, like not physically, but in my
Oh, she froze.
care.
Lauren froze.
Lauren, you
Oh.
froze.
Am I here now? Oh,
You're here now.
it does say it's unstable, so it might happen again. But just like struggling between higher and lower, and that, you know, it's like some, you know, the devil and the guardian, and it's true. Like we go through that through life, like where we're like, oh, you know, why did I do that? Or
Yeah.
I don't know if you just heard Eric singing. He's working from home today.
I didn't hear him singing. What is he singing?
He's singing my name. He doesn't realize I'm on Zoom, but he knows I'm on Zoom.
What did he say he does?
Yeah.
He's not singing Hare Krishna.
No, he's not dancing Hare Krishna. Yeah, I agree with you, Lauren. And like it's like so many times when I need to make a decision on something hard, I immediately like have to learn so much about it and do so much research. And it's like, that's like the intellect part of it. But this book is saying like there's another part of it, the spiritual part of it, that I also have to incorporate into it. Like just knowing I have the answers inside of me already.
Allowing our instincts to guide us, which we sometimes push down and away
Yeah, like
because of our intellect.
It's like that third
I had
eye.
highlighted the one passage that I did highlight that I still think, I don't know if I would have highlighted it this morning, but there was on the contrary, he becomes kind and loving because there arise within him certain impulses and desires coming from some unknown place, which rendered it impossible for him to be otherwise without suffering discomfort and pain. So I still feel that the importance of that there comes, you know, if you do, you know, have even just thoughts of mean thoughts about people or something like that, as you begin to know more, even that can cause you discomfort and pain, even if you maybe haven't actually done anything, you haven't done anything, because most of us don't do anything that's mean, but even just having the thoughts about it, I think.
I totally agree. And that's why I keep going back to those 4 keys. And as
Yeah.
like I have these negative thoughts about these 2 people and I have to cut the cord.
Yeah.
And Eric doesn't have to, but I do. And I can't stop thinking. It's so unhealthy for me. It drags me down into this mud every day. They waste so much of my energy. And it's not their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. It's just something I feel toward them. So I got to put them back in that wicked where I just completely ignore them. So I can't have my energy toward them anymore.
Right. I have the same, and I keep telling myself that that's what I'm going to do, but unfortunately the person is my boss, so so it's a little hard during the summer. It's fine, but during the school year
a break.
I have such a hard time with it. But what I have to tell myself is to not get dragged into the gossip, you know, in the faculty room, or to not get dragged into even in my own thoughts. But it's so hard because I do all the time. I just, well, my husband's so good at saying to me, she's so good at saying, but think about from her perspective, it's got to be really hard to be in that position and make those decisions. And And I try to do that and see, you know, she's got a lot of things to consider that I don't have to consider because she's in a different position than I am. All I have to consider is the children. And that's my bottom line. Everything is all about the children. But I keep saying to myself, but that should be her bottom line too. See, there I go again. I can't, once I get started, I get started.
You have to be, she has to go in the wicked box, or he have to go there for the summer. You need a vacation.
Yeah, but it's hard. I know what you're talking about, Jackie, because I think what you're getting at is you have different almost philosophies or approaches about how to approach something. And it's like, well, this is what I believe in, and this is the right way. And why can't you see that?
And I have to try to remember to, because what starts with me is that I start then going, well, who am I to think that what I think is better than what she thinks, you know? So I go down that road every time, just because, you know, and then so it just becomes this whole unraveling of thought. But yeah, I just have to, as much as I can, just cut it off.
Detach.
But you know, is that kind of, and is that intellect? That's the intellect coming in, you know, because I want to not have, I want to have, you know, it goes back to the sutras, you know, ahisma, non-harming. I don't want to even have harming thoughts about people. I don't want to, you know, I want to move away from that, but it's just so hard sometimes.
So hard. I don't know, Domenica, I can't remember if you were part of our discussion, and Lauren, I'm sure you're familiar with the 4 keys from the sutra, but if you guys are not sure what we're talking about, I can give an overview on Monday.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I know that. Yeah.
Okay. I have a fun sheet of paper I can share on Monday. I don't want to hold this up today. But it's definitely something I've been, and I think part of it, it's something that it's a tool I use. It's been a tool I've used during COVID. But Jackie, I do think it is part of intellect, but for me, sometimes it's even instinct. Like that first meeting you have with somebody and immediately something, you don't like them. And like you give them the benefit of the doubt, and then intellect starts coming in, and then you're like, nope, I still don't like you. And like you can't even, they could be the sweetest, nicest person. And I don't know what it is. Like, I just don't like you. And there's so many humans out there. Like, we don't have to like everybody, and people don't have to like me. And I'm comfortable with people not liking me, but we cannot be rude or disrespectful or mean to other people. And that's what the difference is. We don't have to like everybody, but we have to respect people. So it is still harmful having these thoughts toward people.
Right.
It's you, yeah.
Yeah, it's harmful energy you're putting out there. Like this is why we have and then we'll talk about this when I do the 4 keys on Monday. I'll make a note, but and this is a real hard yoga practice. This is harder than like holding plank for 5 minutes, but like practicing compassion for those people because they need it more. They need it more.
But like you said, also like some people, like that instinct is a real thing, and sometimes you have to listen to that to protect yourself too. So it's important to listen to that and know that instinct, you can't ignore it, and when you do, you realize it was actual always, because it is a real thing, and you just have to, you know, love and let go. And that's hard too, because sometimes you want to change your thought on that person, and
or worse, you want to change that person, and it's like they're not willing to change, and then you get frustrated. It works the other way too, though. Have you ever met someone and like you immediately like, oh my God, I know you my whole entire life? Like I feel like everybody that I connect with through Rev is like that. Like, so it works both ways. So it's not just the bad way, it's the good way too.
But the bad way seems to be so like, draining.
Like, do you ever think about the positive people all day long? Like, oh, I just hope they're doing so well. Like we dwell on the negative instead of the positive. Like, it's hard. So like, you know, like if you're going down the rabbit hole of negative, it's that pivot to gratitude, you know,
Yeah.
like it's the idea. I taught this in class last night that I just love this so much. I want to like write it down, like that idea of every moment is the opportunity to serve or express gratitude. No room for mean negative thoughts in there.
Right. Yes, I should write that down as well, Pam, because it only takes me starting this and I can totally go down the rabbit hole. So
I mean, I still do my daily 3 things, and as hard as it is, sometimes I write down the names of the people that are pissing me off because they're allowing me to grow myself, you know, and I practice gratitude toward them. But you got to be truthful about it. So you got to, like, if you pick a day where you want to be grateful for the, you know, grateful for whatever reason this person came into your life for. You know, they say people come into our lives for a reason, come and go for whatever, but
We have to try to figure out what they're trying to, even what that's trying to teach us, right? Like the good stuff is teaching us something and the bad stuff can teach us something too.
yeah.
We have to be open to that uncomfortableness.
And that might be the spiritual part of, like, we have the intellect part of meeting the instinctive part of meeting someone, and then like the spiritual part could be like the reasoning why this person's in our life, maybe.
It reminds me of something a podcast I was listening to yesterday about this guy who went through all this stuff and a loss of a family member, and how he now looks at, like, he went through like this traumatic state, but now how he looks at it like as such a gift because it allowed him to grow so much. So just that thought of thinking about a loss as a gift to allow you to grow is just, I think that's what we're trying to set. Like, that's also part of that negative thing, right? Like trying to take something negative and seeing it as something to grow with.
Yeah,
So,
I do that with my sister. Like, it sucked that she died, but her dying wasn't you know, you make it about yourself, and I suffered for so long with it, but really she was sick. So did I want her here selfishly to suffer? I was 21 years old when she passed away. I'd be a totally different person. I'd be walking around with my blinders on still. Total wake up call. Like, it was a wake up call. It took me a long time to figure it out, but and this is why now I like share her story and I spread her legacy around, because that's my way of honoring her and the healthy part of life and death, instead of just like grieving her so I don't want to say negatively because that's not the right word, but like, grief is a complex. There's happy, sad, joyful, happy, joyful part of it, but then there's like the sad, heavy part of it. But you can also grieve on the lighter side of it. But yeah, I totally agree with what that person said.
My girlfriend sent me something from a book she was reading yesterday, actually, and it's like exactly what y'all are saying. Let me read it to you. It says the skill of reframing. Numerous organizations in the US are training their workers in the skill of reinterpreting information or reframing because it is seen as a key trait in resilience. In a Harvard Business Review article, Dean M. Becker, founder of Adaptive Learning Systems, observes, more than education, more than experience, more than training, a person's level of resilience will determine who succeeds and who fails. That's true in the cancer ward, it's true in the Olympics, and it's true in the boardroom. The ability to reframe negative situations is a key element to being resilient. Numerous studies show that when we deliberately reinterpret an event to feel better about it, it decreases activity in areas of the brain involved in the processing of negative emotions and increases areas of the brain involved in cognitive control and adaptive integration. In one reframing study, 2 groups of participants were shown pictures of angry faces. The first group was told to think the people in the picture had just had a bad day and their faces had nothing to do with them. The other group was told to feel whatever emotions the faces elicited. What they found was that the group that had been trained to adjust their attitude about the angry faces weren't disturbed at all. In fact, recorded electrical brain activity showed that the reframing had wiped out the negative signals in their brain, whereas the group that had been instructed to feel whatever came to mind were disturbed by the faces. We feel what we think. In a study done by researchers at Stanford University, participants with phobias were exposed to spiders and snakes. One group was trained to reframe their experience and the other wasn't. The trained group showed significantly less fear and panic than the control group, and they experienced lasting changes in emotional responses when they were later exposed again to the spiders and the snakes. This demonstrates the durable effects of cognitive reframing. So not only does reframing change our brain chemistry, but it helps how we interpret pain, fear, anxiety, and the like. And this reframing is directly related to the language we use both out loud and in our head. It just made me think about like the whole process of what we teach at Rev, like this Himalayan yoga master tradition. It's that, right? Like we're being trained to reframe our minds in the way we think about the world. And I just think about how we fared during 2020, and I was watching a lot of other people being crushed by it. And, you know, we were always sort of like yammering on about how like it was because we were doing this, like this was making us resilient. And I sent it to my mom and I'm like, this is what you do. Like our whole lives, if anything happened, she would like sit down with me. We try to understand why the person was going through it and then like be like, okay, just begin again, like move on, live your life, try to be happy, like don't focus too much, stop caring what other people think. And she's like been through so much and she's accomplished so much in her life. And I said to her, I'm like, you know, it's funny because dad gives you so much crap about when you do this, but like this is actually like a really positive thing you do. And she told me that the nuns taught her when she was in school. I was like, there it is, another spiritual tradition. Like it's so valid. It's so valid to keep reframing the mind. We only have so much energy to put out there, you know, we have to like use it for our own betterment and not be drained.
That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I thought it was so great when she sent through. I'm like, oh my God, so wonderful.
Where's
I love
that?
when studies back up what we talk about.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so funny how we all are thinking the same thing today.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do some breath work and meditate.
Okay, have a good weekend.
You too.
Yeah, have a good weekend, everybody.
Oh my God, everyone steal Domenica's energy today. I'm gonna do legs at the wall today, so I'm gonna shut my camera off so you guys don't have to stare at my feet.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna do the same.
Okay, so let's sit up nice and tall. Taking a few breaths in through the nose and out through the nose. Putting the Hare Krishna chant in the chat in case anybody wants it.
You're the best.
And then just take your right hand over to your nose and close the right nostril with the thumb. Inhale through the left. Close left, exhale right. Inhale right. Close right, exhale left. Inhale left. Close left, exhale right. Inhale right. Close right, exhale left. Inhale left. Close left, exhale right. Inhale right. Close right, exhale left. Inhale left. Close left, exhale right. Inhale right. Close right, exhale left. Release the palm. If you want to do a few more rounds, go for it. Otherwise, I'm setting the timer and you'll join us when you're ready. Bringing your hands together in front of your heart. Namaste.